Picture this. It's 1849, and Edgar Allan Poe just vanishes for 6 days.
6 days.
And then he's found delirious wearing clothes that aren't even his.
Oh, wow.
In a gutter in Baltimore, no less.
Yeah.
And 4 days later, he's dead.
I mean, talk about a life imitating art.
Yeah.
I mean, his stories were full of mystery and darkness.
Like something he would have written.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so fascinating to me.
Yeah. So today we're going to do a deep dive into Edgar Allan Poe's final days.
Okay, sounds good.
We've got a clip from a podcast called History That Doesn't Suck.
Mm-hmm.
And the host, Professor Greg Jackson, kind of walks us through this whole thing.
I think we should start by acknowledging that there's a lot of speculation surrounding Poe's death.
Right.
But even the confirmed facts are pretty strange.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start at the beginning. On September 26th, 1849,
Okay.
we find Poe at his fiance's home in Richmond, Virginia.
Fiancé.
Yeah, Elmira Shelton.
Oh, right. Elmira Shelton. They were actually childhood sweethearts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they reconnected later in life after both of them were widowed, but even their relationship was a little bit odd.
What do you mean?
Well, she described it as a partial understanding.
Partial understanding.
Yeah, which is, very Poe, I think.
A little cryptic.
Yeah, exactly.
So despite his illness, Poe leaves for Baltimore the next morning.
Okay.
He even stops to see a doctor and get some medicine. But here's where things get a little strange.
Okay.
He leaves all of his luggage behind.
That is strange.
Looked like he left in a hurry or, wasn't thinking clearly.
Right, or something happened.
And then it gets even weirder. He arrives in Baltimore on September 28th and vanishes for 6 days.
6 days? I can't even imagine what people must have been thinking.
Right. And the podcast goes into all these different theories.
Like what?
Well, everything from, just a really bad drinking binge to being kidnapped.
Kidnapped? By who?
By a political gang.
A political gang?
Yeah. Apparently there was a thing back then called cooping.
Cooping? What's that?
So these gangs would kidnap people, get them drunk, and force them to vote multiple times for their candidate.
No way they couldn't get away with that.
Well, it was the 1840s, and Professor Jackson says it was actually pretty common in Baltimore.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
And get this, Poe was found outside a pub that was being used as a voting station.
Oh, really?
So it makes you wonder.
Yeah, that cooping theory is starting to sound more plausible.
So 6 days after Poe disappears, he's found delirious and in a gutter.
Oh my gosh, that's awful.
Yeah, wearing clothes that didn't fit him. Clearly not in his right mind.
Do we know who found him?
Yeah, a doctor named Joseph Evans Snodgrass.
Snodgrass?
Snodgrass had actually treated Poe for alcohol abuse years earlier.
Oh, really? So he knew him?
Yeah, and that just adds another layer to the story.
Yeah, for sure. And this is where the podcast really gets into the details of what happened next.
Okay, so Poe's in the hospital. What was his condition like?
Well, it's hard to say for sure, but it's hard to say for sure, but we do know that his death is still a mystery.
Yeah, the podcast doesn't really give us any definitive answers, does it?
No, it doesn't. It just kind of lays out the facts and leaves us to speculate.
I mean, it's kind of fitting, though, right?
Yeah, in a way. I mean,
given his penchant for the unexplained.
Right, exactly.
So do we at least know anything about his last moments?
Well, according to the podcast, Poe was lucid enough to talk when he was first admitted to the hospital.
Okay.
But he kept calling out for someone named Reynolds.
Reynolds?
Yeah.
Who's Reynolds?
Nobody seems to know.
Oh, wow.
It's another mystery.
Another piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, and then a day before he died, his condition got much worse.
Oh, no.
He became delirious again. His breathing was shallow, and then he said his final words.
Which were?
Lord help my poor soul.
Chilling, isn't it?
It really is.
I mean, such a tragic end to such a brilliant life.
Yeah, it's hard not to feel a sense of sadness when you think about everything he went through.
The podcast doesn't really get into the darker aspects of Poe's reputation. Like, the whole brooding alcoholic image.
Yeah, that's definitely the image that a lot of people have of him.
But he was so much more than that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was an incredible writer.
A poet, literary critic.
Right.
I think it's important to remember that he was a real person.
Yeah.
With his own struggles and demons.
Definitely.
He was dealing with personal tragedies, societal pressures. And, 19th century medicine wasn't exactly advanced.
That's a good point.
I don't know. This whole deep dive has really made me want to revisit Poe's work.
Me too.
Seeing his life through this lens makes you appreciate his writing on a whole other level.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's like you're getting a glimpse into his mind.
Right, and that's what's so great about deep dives like this.
Yeah.
It's not just about learning facts. It's about making connections and sparking curiosity.
Absolutely.
And it makes you want to learn more.
Speaking of learning more, there's something else in the podcast I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
So after taking us through Poe's last days, the podcast does something pretty cool.
Oh, yeah.
They actually read some of his work.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about Poe's writing style.
Right.
But it's another thing to hear it.
Yeah, to really experience it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Professor Jackson chose 3 pieces. The Telltale Heart,
Oh, classic.
The Cask of Amontillado, and of course, The
Yeah.
Raven.
It doesn't get much more Poe than that.
Right. And each one really captures those elements we associate with him.
Yeah.
Like the psychological suspense, the brooding atmosphere.
And those unreliable narrators.
Oh, yeah. You never know who to trust.
Well, exactly.
And even if you've read those stories before,
Yeah.
hearing them read aloud just adds this whole other level of creepiness.
Oh, for sure.
Professor Jackson has this amazing voice.
He really does.
He's really good at creating that eerie feeling.
Like you're right there in the story.
Yeah, especially with The Raven.
Oh, yeah.
It's like it was made to be read aloud.
By a crackling fire on a stormy night.
Exactly. And before he reads The Raven, Professor Jackson gives a little bit of context.
Oh, that's helpful.
Yeah, he talks about the symbolism Poe used and how he created that sense of dread.
Okay.
Like how the Raven perches on a bust of Pallas, the Greek goddess of wisdom.
Oh, right.
Which is also associated with mourning.
Interesting.
Or the repetition of nevermore.
Yeah.
Which reinforces that feeling of hopelessness.
It's amazing how Poe can weave those layers of meaning into his work.
Yeah, and, it's like he's challenging us to find the clues hidden within his words.
Like a literary puzzle.
Exactly.
I like that.
So we've talked a lot about Poe, his mysterious death, his dark and fascinating stories.
Yeah.
But why should someone who's not a literary scholar care about Edgar Allan Poe?
I think Poe's popularity even today tells us something about ourselves,
What do you mean?
Well, his work explores those primal fears, the anxieties we all have about death and loss and the fragility of the human mind.
And those are timeless themes, right? We may not be walling people up like Montresor and the Cask of Amontillado.
Hopefully not.
But those themes of revenge, guilt, madness, they still resonate with us today.
Oh, absolutely. And even though Poe died over a century ago, his exploration of the darker side of human nature feels very relevant in the world today.
Yeah, he reminds us that sometimes the most unsettling stories aren't about ghosts and goblins,
right,
but about the monsters within ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the life and death of Edgar Allan Poe,
okay,
I'm left with this thought. Poe's writing is filled with symbolism, hidden meanings, unreliable narrators. Could it be that his own life, particularly those final mysterious days, was his ultimate unfinished work?
Whoa.
A puzzle he left behind for us to decipher.
I never thought of it that way.
With each clue offering a glimpse into the mind of a literary genius. What do you think?
That's a great question, and I think one that Poe himself would have enjoyed pondering.
Yeah.
It definitely gives us all something to think about.
Right. The mystery of Edgar Allan Poe continues to fascinate and intrigue, just as he intended.
Exactly.
And that's what we love about a good deep dive.
Yeah.
It sparks new questions. It gets you thinking. It leaves you wanting to explore further.
For sure.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Edgar Allan Poe.
Anytime.
And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss our next deep dive into the fascinating world of information.